we're going to get started here. There may be more people that will show up and come in. We do want to get started fairly on time since we are recording and airing this on air, and there are a few people watching with us. So welcome those of you who are watching via web today. And so first of all, I want to thank those who came out today. One of the things that we started doing with the LaRouche organization here in Texas is we want to make sure that you have your tiger stripes and you're geared up for battle, because right now we are in a very tumultuous situation in terms of where this nation and the world is going. And a lot of people have to come to a rapid understanding of how dangerous the moment is that we find ourselves in, yet at the same time, how quickly we can see a change in the situation, a change in the world process by the actions that you as individuals decide to take, that we as individuals decide to take to actually organize a new era for mankind. And that's been the objective of the LaRouche organization, Mr. LaRouche and his associates, for a really long time now, is to actually organize society once again around what it is that was the intention of our nation, of our founding fathers, in collaboration with building great nations around the world against an empire, against the British Empire, whose total intention has been destruction of sovereign nations, population reduction, and war. And so we're here today in League City, Texas. We were last week we organized a similar meeting of constituents in the South Texas, South Houston area. And next week will be in another location, which you'll find out about. But let me just get started with a couple of highlights of where we stand, what the world looks like right now, and then we will go into the nature very rapidly here of what our discussion will be based on. First of all, for those who don't know, or maybe first timers here, actually who Lyndon LaRouche is, and why his role is so important and so unique. I'll say that I've been working with Mr. LaRouche for well over 10 years. My husband Ian here has been the same. And Mr. LaRouche has been leading this fight for several decades. And the fight is not just political, but the fight is to actually organize a society and within the population around people who actually understand what the basis of real economics, economic value, what the basis of economy is organized around. And LaRouche actually has a track record that goes back for several decades now in his working on the question of physical economy. He has been one of these most accurate economic forecasters, making economic forecasts that go back to the early 1970s, late 1960s. He warned of the collapse of the Bretton Woods system under Nixon, the bringing in of the floating exchange rate system. He worked very closely with Reagan. Reagan adopted his policy of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And LaRouche's method goes back to what our founding fathers had intended in economic policy around this question of the basis of economics founded in the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, our first Treasury Secretary, the person who wrote 3 major works, which we're going to refer to a couple here, called the National Bank, Report on National Banking, Report on Public Credit, and the Report on Manufacturing, excuse me. And so we're going to be discussing that here in a second. But where we stand right now, Mr. LaRouche actually made an insight as to people's understanding of how history is made, which I think is very important to get at why it is that you have a lot of people that has been conditioned to think that history is just a sequence of events. They come in a sequence of orders that is based on something that is understood through people's experiences in life. And what Mr. LaRouche has described is that history does not come from the understanding of simple trend lines, simple experiences, but what actually changes and organizes the making of history is when you have interruptions and processes that people think this is the way things are going to go. This is the way society is organized, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Well, we've had a couple of events that happened over the course of this past week, which have been some very exciting interruption for the process of the way that people thought society ought to be run, or thought the way the political process was going to go. Because a lot of people are sitting here and a lot of people are frustrated saying, oh, well, all hope is lost. We got Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush. These are our choices for presidency, and we might as well go and get the rope. Well, you don't have to get the rope. You don't have to actually give up on life, because right now it's not the time to give up. Right now it's actually the time for more people to have a higher understanding of how this political process actually works, and your role as an individual, to intervene in that. So this past week, what has happened is that the system that you thought was all powerful, all knowing, all being, you can't do anything about, of the British Empire, the Queen of England, Elizabeth, and the British role in their destructive policy against our nation, has taken a real blow to the gut. And I will just show you that this is the recent cover, the new cover for this week of our Executive Intelligence Review magazine. People need to get this. This is going to be, if you're not a subscriber to Executive Intelligence Review and LaRouche's intelligence magazine from our organization, you need to be, because this is the most powerful intelligence report in the world. And I will just say that for those who are sitting in the back who can't see this cover, it says "Depose the Nazi Queen." Now, many of you may have heard over the television, over the airways just recently, that what has now been exposed is shocking to the world, is that the Sun, one of the leading tabloids in Britain, a magazine under Rupert Murdoch or so, has actually put out and exposed video footage and pictures that have come out with the Queen of England at 7 years old, who was being trained by Edward VIII, her uncle, on the Nazi salute, along with the Queen Mother and others. And this thing is not just something that's, oh, a happenstance is coming along right now, that people are saying, oh, okay, you got a 7-year-old girl learning how to do the Nazi salute. No, what's happening here is that you have forces within the British monarchy who are saying enough is enough. This empire is ready to go. And so what has happened is that there are now new reports coming out every single day on the role of the royal family in their support of Hitler going back to 1930. And this is really the monarch family, because they're trying to get all of their goons out, including former former Labor Party member and Prime Minister Tony Blair, who is coming out strongly in defense of the monarchy and going against anybody who is opposing the monarchy. With what the latest developments are is that in the course of this fight against this monarchy and against the British Empire, within the Parliament of Britain itself, you have Tony Blair, excuse me, one of the key people who has been put up as a leader for the Labor Party, which is Tony Blair's party, is a guy by the name of Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is pro-Glass-Steagall. He's been fighting against this monarchy's policy for quite some time. He has been very influential in even working with the LaRouche movement in our organization internationally on the Glass-Steagall fight. But he is somebody who Tony Blair completely despises and started to do a campaign against the parliament members who would actually vote for this guy. Now, let me tell you, this is somebody who is fighting for Glass-Steagall, fighting for against the policy of the banking policies of Wall Street and so forth, that Tony Blair has said anybody in the British Parliament who is actually voting for this guy, who is promoting him, should be stopped. Now, this is the same. This guy, let me tell you, was the person who also was going strongly after Tony Blair for his lies and his corruption and involvement in the in the Iraq war efforts, going back to the Bush-Cheney era. So I won't go through the details because I think that gives you a sense right now that you have now an intervention into the process right now. This monarchy, which was all powerful, is now being taken on like never before. Now, you put that in the context of what just happened right here in the United States, where one individual in one moment of time, as Mr. LaRouche has said, made an impact on history. And he made this impact on history. This was a young man from our organization who intervened on Hillary Clinton last week. Hillary Clinton was given an economic speech in New York. And during her speech, one of our members got into the speech and he was in the back. She continued to go through what her economic policies were going to be for the nation. But she never said anything about Glass-Steagall, banking reorganization, taking on Wall Street in any real way. And so he stood up at the end of the meeting, asked her, are you going to reinstate Glass-Steagall? Asked 3 times, she didn't answer the question. And so he was escorted out by the police, by the security, and several media sources followed him out. This thing has gone viral nationally and internationally. And what has been the result of it is that Hillary Clinton has made clear that she has no intention on reinstating Glass-Steagall, banking reorganization. And when she made this foul up by not answering the question, I'll tell you, she made a further foul up because the next time she made her position known, because less than a week later, a reporter asked her, well, someone recently asked you about Glass-Steagall and you didn't answer the question. So I'll ask you again, what is your position? And she went through some flub dub of why she was not in support of Glass-Steagall. She doesn't know why people keep talking about this as the solution. It's not going to work, and basically made it clear that she's not for the banking regulations on Wall Street and for Glass-Steagall as the solution. So what this young man Daniel and our organization did is that he intervened into the process, which people said Hillary Clinton's assuring. And Mr. LaRouche has made it clear that after this intervention that Daniel made, Hillary Clinton's uh, prospects, expectations, or whatever of becoming president were gone. I mean, and you can look at this right now. This is the reality that we're dealing with. So we have a moment right now where this presidential election is going to be shaped by one thing and one thing only: Glass-Steagall. Are you on the side of Wall Street, or are you on the side of the bankers? So far, two of her Democratic opponents in the primary have said that Glass-Steagall is the key issue and have backed and called for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. So that's where we stand right now, at a moment when you have a total blowout of the transatlantic financial system, a total blowout of the system of Wall Street and the London financial oligarchs right now and the US, and a drive on behalf of Obama, his British backers, and others toward war, thermonuclear war. Let me just end my remarks for this part of the presentation by first of all highlighting that if people are not in the real world and understand how close we are to the threat of thermonuclear war, you better get real, because this thing is serious. When you have the situation as to where there was just a report in an article called The Revealer, actually detailing the workings of the new B-6112 bomber that the Obama administration has just organized or has just approved. This thing is, we're not even talking about the cost of it. You know, a lot of people are saying the cost of it is going to be $11 billion by the year 2015. This is a bomb that we're building, that we want to build, according to reports, 400 of by the year 2020, which is going to be of a energy rating and output in more than 3 times that of the A bomb dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is 50,000 TNT. Now, remind you, this is the president of the United States who, when he first got in there, said we will build no new nuclear arsenal. No new nuclear arsenal. What kind of lying sack of something is this? I mean, people got to get serious here. We're sitting here now, we get all excited because, you know, the president just signed the Iran agreement. The basis of that Iran agreement was going to be on the fact that we would actually pull back on relations, negative relations with Russia. That's not happening. We were told, Russia was told that the reason the ballistic missile defense systems, BMDs, were put at the border of Russia was because they were aimed at Iran. Well, now that we've had relations actually organized differently with Iran, why aren't these missiles being removed? They have no intention of removing these missiles. As a matter of fact, the intention is to create even more powerful weapons, arsenal of nuclear weapons. And the point a lot of military leaders and others are making is, why would you even be building this if you have not the intention to use them? I mean, why are you going to spend, when people are out there starving, when you have economic collapse going on, you have unemployment and so forth, you're going to spend $11 billion on building new nuclear arsenal that you say we're not going to use, just to kind of have it in the background or something? That doesn't make any sense. So this is the moment we're at. Obama should have been impeached a long time ago. He must be impeached now. And we're at the moment where this question of an interruption into the process is absolutely needed right now. Because if we understand this, then we can get down to real business on how we're going to reorganize our society and our economy again. So I wanted to start with that, and then I want to see if Ian wants to go from there, and then I will come back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So one of the things that Keisha sort of alluded to, we didn't touch on as in depth, is another one of these interruptions which is happening, which is the blowout of the transatlantic economies. The financial system combined between North America and Europe, especially, these nations have built up massive amounts of debt, which is essentially fictitious because it's based upon trading around assumed values that will be supposedly collected someday in the form of financial derivatives and other financial paper. Now, what does that mean? It means that for 40 years, almost, we've been shutting down the actual productive wealth of the countries in the form of our manufacturing base and our agricultural base and the scientific research and development capabilities, and exporting these to third world countries because those countries didn't have the labor laws, they didn't have the other infrastructure, they didn't have all the requirements in terms of cleanliness and labor treatment that we did. And so they could produce the same thing for 90% cheaper and just ship it back here and sell to us. In order to keep our currency at some kind of tradable value, since it wasn't based on anything real anymore, we shifted to providing services of finished goods and trading around in financial paper. But the problem is that just that, you can't, at the end of the day, you can't eat financial paper. You can't drive it to work. You can't heat your home with it beyond burning it literally and other things like that. It's actually just paper. It's actually just metal. And in some cases, it's actually just data bytes on a card in a bank somewhere on a transaction sheet. So and that all works fine as long as people can continue paying into those debts at the bottom where the physical things are actually based off of. People can actually continue to pay their mortgages or pay their car notes or pay their credit card bills. But as soon as the disconnect from the standard of living comes back to hit you and people start not making those payments, they start defaulting on these debts, you come up with a situation like has been happening in cities and states around the United States, in Greece, Cyprus, Portugal, Italy, Spain, France, Ireland, and Britain. Just about every country in Europe except for Germany who has any sort of emphasis on what's going on. So what has happened is that there's been a showdown to say, well, we don't want to kill the population anymore. We don't want to, in Greece especially, we don't want to actually throw people out on the streets, take their pensions, sell off our cultural heritage in terms of the Parthenon and other relics and sacred places, and open these up to be looted and have giant billboards plastered all over them. We're going to actually protect the population. And this caused a big showdown where it's pretty clear that there's going to be a ripple effect. It's not going to be contained in Greece. And what this calls to question is, what's more important? A piece of paper with numbers written on it saying, I owe you this much, or people's lives? And no one really wants to say that explicitly except us in this movement, because to do so would be impolite. It's not nice to talk about people's lives, but every so often the truth slips out, and you hear things about how J.P. Morgan says the big problem are the anti-fascist constitutions of Europe. You hear these little things come out every now and then, like the Prince Philip of the British talking about if he were to be reincarnated, he'd like to come back as a deadly virus to help control population. So you hear every now and then oopsies, flub-dubs, moments of truth, you might call them. And what is happening is that this people are starting to ask, well, what do we do about this? Now, the LaRouche organization has been out there for years now calling for the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act as the first of four main steps to be taken to actually move through this crisis and keep people's lives intact and win and allow the worthless money to vaporize, to be sloughed off like a dead snake skin or something like that. And what are people here in the audience familiar with Glass-Steagall at all?
Can you develop the basics of it?
Or is anyone not? Yeah? Okay.
Really.
So, okay. Glass-Steagall identifies money into two categories. You have money which is traded around for commercial purposes, as in maintaining your business bank account, your personal checking account. There's other categories for mortgages, which are long-term accounts. And it separates those commercial activities from speculation and investment activities. These are trading on stocks. These are trading on derivatives and other types of things. And these things are separate because if it ever comes down to a crisis, society depends upon the commercial activity. It does not depend upon investment activity. So commercial things are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and investment activities are not insured. They're gambles, they're risks. You go to the casino and you lose, you lose. That's the way it should be. Now, what's happened with the takedown of Glass-Steagall is that banks were forced to merge their assets in order to remain competitive, as in make a profit. As in not just make a profit you can live on and maintain your business, but they began to have to compete with the companies who were primarily engaged in the most radical forms of gambling and speculation. So now your retirement is an IRA, and you can lose your retirement if the market collapses. Now mortgages are issued by a bank, diced and repackaged in securities, and traded in extra value. And that's how, as banks, as when I've sat down with different bankers, that's how they've actually been able to guarantee, that's how they back up the loans that they do make. They back up loans on the marketplace. So what's happening is that the physical production capacities of the country have actually gone down. We've had a net decline in the physical productive output per capita and per county over the course of the last 40-something years. But the financial tradings and the value of the dollar has supposedly risen in that same period, to the point now where 28 banks who are considered too big to fail, too big to prosecute for any kind of illegal transgressions, are controlling up to 40% of the wealth on the planet. And they are engaged in drug trafficking, money laundering for that, and money laundering for terrorism, human trafficking, and all kinds of other things that are considered to be illegal, unauthorized, and just plain bad business. The Senate has had multiple hearings and investigations on this. Our organization exposed this back in the 70s. So it's known.
It was the law of the land from...
Oh, Glass-Steagall was the law of the land from 1933 up until 1999. Now, the Glass-Steagall, if you were to reinstate this tomorrow, what would happen is that all of this financial paper, which is being assumed by governments, would no longer be the obligation of governments to cover. So there would be a mark to market. What would happen is these banks would have to write down all these debts, which are fictitious. And they can, because no one wants to buy a piece of paper when it's realized it's just a piece of paper. So there's going to be a reckoning, but it'll be good. It means we actually can go back to having a different system than what we've been operating on in the majority of the lives of the people who are alive today. And so, however, simply getting rid of toxic debt does not actually solve the problem. You have to generate credit which is not toxic, which is in fact worth something. And that's just some of what we're going to get into here. I brought a show and tell piece for people, which we can pass around. What I have here are 3 pieces of paper, and I'll hold it up for the camera. I have on the bottom, I have a U.S. note from the 1950s, a silver certificate. It's a $1 bill. On the 5, I have a what is it? A U.S. note. Yeah. So the first one is a silver certificate. I have a U.S. note and I have a Federal Reserve note. This was from 1957. This was from 1963, and this was from 1976. Can anyone tell me the difference between these 3?
I want to know the difference between U.S. note and federal. Did it say Federal Reserve or just federal? Yeah.
Yeah. This is a Federal Reserve note.
The difference in the backing. What's the difference in the backing?
The silver certificate, I can be paid in silver.
Yeah.
I don't look at
I'll pass these around so people can take a look at them. They're irreplaceable, so please don't don't eat them or.
Yeah, Nixon.
I'll put a 5 in.
So Nixon
Yeah, right.
changed it.
Nixon got rid of the Bretton Woods system in '71. Yeah.
That was actually gold or something of intrinsic value backing.
Well, here's the funny thing. Actually, there's no difference between the 3 of them because they're all pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the original one, you can get, if it's a silver note, you can get paid in silver.
That's right.
That's right. The whole thing was designed for. Once they dropped the gold reserve and the Federal Reserve for the silver, now it's crap.
Right. You can exchange on one of those pieces of paper, you can exchange it for a piece of metal.
Right.
For another piece of paper, I believe you can't exchange it except for a finished good or a piece of paper, another piece of paper. I'll make change out of it.
For all debts, public and private.
Yeah. But here's the funny thing. I mean, where does the price of silver get regulated? Whether we have gold or silver or other pieces of metal. Yeah, some people have talked about that. When FDR put us on the gold reserve standard, and what we kept a supply of gold on hand, recognizing that the majority of people would not need to exchange it for the gold. So there was a leveraging above the supply of gold for the paper. And I don't know what the ratio was of the leveraging. When Hamilton set up the national bank in a similar manner, the ratio was set, I believe, at 1-3. But
And just to, I mean, because he asked the question, so where does the price of the silver or gold get regulated and so forth, and what's the value of it as compared to paper currency? How do you actually come to understand these values? Well, Hamilton had a different idea about that, and I just wanted to read this one quote because people get at, okay, I have these pieces of paper in my hand. They're supposed to be worth something. I can buy something with them. I can go to the store. Well, is that always true? What gives that money so-called value? So Hamilton, in actually addressing the problems that come up, or concerns, should we say, of the national bank, takes on one of the concerns that people still talk about to this day, which is the question of the backing of paper money by silver or gold. And so he says, The last and the heaviest charge is still to be examined. That is, that banks tend to banish the gold and silver of the country. And he's talking about what the national banks, that a national bank, people say, would banish the gold and silver of a country. He says the force of this objection rests on there being an engine of paper credit, which, by furnishing a substitute for the metals, is supposed to promote their exportation. It is an objection which, if it has any foundation, lies against any bank's particularly, peculiarity, but against every species of paper credit. He goes on to say, the most common answer given to this is that the thing supposed is of little or no consequence, that it is immaterial what serves the purpose of money, whether paper or gold and silver, that the effect of both upon industry is the same, and that the intrinsic wealth of a nation is to be measured not by the abundance of the precious metals contained in it, but by the quantity of the productions of its labor and its industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the ironic point is that, well, under Franklin Roosevelt, we used silver certificates and Federal Reserve notes to build the Tennessee Valley Authority. Under John F. Kennedy, we had Federal Reserve notes and we had U.S. notes. We built the Apollo program. What are we building today? We're not really building anything. So even though these three are pieces of paper, what it is it's immaterial what the currency is actually formed with. Paper is simply the most convenient way of carrying things around. It's durable, it's lightweight, it's easy to fold up and take care of. But actually, whether it's silver, metal, platinum, gold, any kind of thing like that, pieces of paper or data bytes is not the point. Because the point is that at the end of the day, you can't drive those things to work. You can't eat them. You can't do anything physically with them to support your livelihood. That's why in Weimar Germany, when the whole economy was hyperinflating, people would actually light their fires to cook their food with their money, because it was reduced to its actual physical value as tinder, not tender.
Tinder, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the question really becomes, how do we give a value to the piece of paper? What gives this, what makes this something you would want to have and use as a means of exchange? And that rests in the creditworthiness of the government as the issuer of the credit to be able to pay off its debts. Does anyone here today think that the government is capable of paying off its debts?
No. And what are we saying the latest is? I don't know how many trillions, what are we saying is the latest?
Too much. 18, yeah, right.
18 trillion debt more and growing.
Yeah, there's
Growing.
there's over $2 quadrillion in debt and in derivatives alone, which more than dwarfs the 70 trillion of global gross domestic product. And under bail-in, bail-out, crisis management, governments and therefore you are liable to pay that $2 quadrillion, which is 2,000 trillion. It's impossible. It'll never be paid. It shouldn't be paid. It's illegitimate. It's odious. It's not worth anything. How do we reestablish?
Greece, same thing.
Greece, yeah, same thing. Cyprus, same thing. The Detroit pension workers, same thing. Houston pensioners, same thing. How do we restore the credit of the United States and other governments so that people will believe that the debts will be honored, the legitimate commercial debts? How do we restore the creditworthiness of the American individual so that we can get loans to invest in our businesses? If you have a machine shop, if you have a farm, if you're trying to start a business, you can't get loans today. How do we redo this? Alexander Hamilton understood how to do it. He dealt with a similar situation. After the Revolutionary War, the country was bankrupt. We had all these debts. How do we establish the creditworthiness of the government? Well, Thomas Jefferson, as Secretary of Secretary of State, he had two ideas. Number one, you just cut the budget to nothing, and number two, and just pay it off right away. And number two, you have the states assume the debts, and each state's right to take care of its own debts. And Hamilton overruled him in his report on public credit. And he made a very important point, which is that first off, if you cut the budget to nothing, you'll leave the country completely defenseless, and anyone and everyone can come and take us over. So that's an interesting point. Yeah, we have some parallels. Now, the other thing that he was pointing out is that, well, all these states actually have different interests. They have different resources, they have different populations with different demographics, and they have different directions that they might want to go. And maybe West Virginia doesn't want to sell coal to Pennsylvania, and maybe New York doesn't want to share its river routes to have trade down in Louisiana, because there was a huge, and there still is a huge conflict in the states over slavery. And whether or not an aristocratic slave-owning establishment will have hegemony over the direction of the nation, or whether or not the nation who is constituted to eliminate slavery and establish freedom among all people, whether that will be the guiding hegemonic principle or not. So there was a real conflict at the time. And what Hamilton did is he took all the debts, consolidated them, and then reissued it from the standpoint of credit for the purpose of building up the physical living standards as loans. And you reissue that debt, you say, we're going to, through bonds and so forth, we're going to actually have the ability to pay off the debt by the increase of manufacturing, not just an agrarian economy like Thomas Jefferson wanted, where everyone just sort of like went about with their own farm estate, but that there was going to be a unified top-down development of the nation as a whole to the extent of its reach, so that we could take the differing resources and demographics and skill sets of all the different states and unify them around a mission that could pay down the debts. And so that was a really critical point of how Hamilton was going to reestablish the credit of the United States, so that our currency, whatever it was traded in, is something that people would want to trade.
And so I think you get at this question of how do you restore the credit or restore the trust, is a better word, I would say, of our system of government, the trust within the system that it's going to allow for the greatest amount of productivity to be advanced from its constituency, from its population, because that's what Alexander Hamilton really understood was the basis of economy, because that basis comes, which is the theme of our discussion today, why creativity, human productivity, is the real basis of wealth and not money. That this, as he said, has really no intrinsic value, but the value comes in the productive and creative output of your society. And in order to understand Hamilton's take on this, it's important to go back to what a lot of people sort of brush over as just a nice document, which is that understanding of what formed the conception of our preamble to our Constitution and also the Declaration of Independence. And if you really want to know the fight around that, you have to look at the role of what both Alexander Hamilton as the first Treasury Secretary under George Washington and Washington himself understood about a great man by the name of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And Leibniz had a made very strong contributions to what later became our understanding of this conception of what was adopted of the principle of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this was what was actually adopted in our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, not like some people say of Locke, life, liberty, and property. It wasn't about how much money you had, your slaves you had, your property you had, and so forth, but it was about the happiness that came from the participation of the human mind in creating new things, making creative discoveries. And so one of the major works of Leibniz that helped to shape the understanding of what came about of our Declaration of Independence is something I would recommend people go and read, is a report that he wrote called On Wisdom. And this was written in 1690. It's also known as the Science of Happiness. And it's really where this conception of the pursuit of happiness in our Declaration of Independence came from. And this is what was the conception by Hamilton and George Washington and others that was accepted on, that was understood on this idea of natural law adopted by the founding fathers. So what I wanted to do is I have a couple of quotes from this that I'd like for Louise to read for us. And
moreover, in respect to all power, the greater it is, the more the many is found thereby to be from one, and in one, in that the one governs many outside of itself and represents them in itself. Now, the oneness in the many is nothing other than harmony. And because one agrees more closely with this one than with that one, thus the order from which all beauty comes flows from it, and beauty awakens love. Hence, one sees now how happiness, pleasure, love, perfection, being, power, freedom, harmony, order, and beauty are connected to each other, which is seen correctly by few. And skipping down, such joy, which man can at all times create for himself, when his mind is well constituted, consists in the perception of a pleasure in himself and in his mental powers, when one feels in himself a strong inclination and readiness for goodness and truth, especially by means of thorough intelligence, which a more illuminated mind presents to us, so that we experience the main source, the course, and final purpose of all things, and the unbelievable excellence of the highest nature, which comprises all things in itself, and thereby are elevated above the unknown. Just as if we could see terrestrial objects here under our feet from the stars. Then, at last, we learn entirely from this that we have cause to take the highest joy concerning all that has already happened and is yet to happen, but that we seek, nevertheless, to direct as much as is in our power what has not yet happened for the best. For that is one of the eternal laws of nature, that we shall enjoy the perfection of things and the pleasure which arises from it according to the measure of our knowledge, goodwill, and intended contribution.
creativity is happiness. Happiness is based on that which we come to understand, which is in order with the natural laws of the universe. Happiness is not having a bunch of things or having a bunch of pieces of paper. And this gets to a whole different conception, which Mr. LaRouche is describing, that goes a little bit deeper than even what some of the people who are adopting or the policy of Glass-Steagall even understand. Because it's not about money, it's not about banking at all. What Glass-Steagall gets at is this fundamental core principle of what is the nature of happiness prescribed by the creativity of the human mind. And he, in a recent paper, wrote that Glass-Steagall is creativity per se. And it's a very interesting concept because people want to take these things and make it into just sort of basic conceptions of economics 101, supply and demand, and nothing else matters. Can I buy something with my money? But what are you buying? What are you producing? What is our society being organized around? And if there's a picture here, people can't see it on the web, but it says human creativity, not money, is the source of all wealth. U.S. must crush Wall Street. But there's a picture on it of a young man playing a violin. And he is exuding what real wealth in society actually represents. And you have a young man like this who is actually participating in the process where, it's probably 5, 6, 7 years old, who is actually contributing something of great beauty to society. There's a lot of people who walk around saying our freedoms and our rights are being taken away from us, our liberties. First of all, you don't even know what your freedoms, rights, and liberties are. You got to learn what that is. If you don't understand that the freedom is the freedom to be creative, to actually make contributions to better the next generation of society, the freedom to do the unknown, as Leibniz said, to go into the unknown, such as the intervention that's being made right now on Pluto, that is what real happiness is. That's what real freedom is right now. When your society understands a higher conception of their human identity in accordance with the natural laws of the universe. And, that's something that our society has lost grasp of. We no longer think about these things because we think about how to survive, how to make $1 every day. How are we going to pay for our food and our housing and so forth? And all of that is important, but what is its meaning if you're still unhappy? So our founding fathers were pretty deep in this. They went way beyond money on this question. And that's the level of thinking that we have to get at. That's the level of thinking we have to get our so-called presidential candidates to get at. Yeah, I'm glad you're for Glass-Steagall, but you're going to have to go a whole lot deeper than this. You're going to have to get to the question of how you're going to actually get this society organized again around a higher conception of productivity and the advancements of your population. We need a new cultural renaissance. Glass-Steagall should invoke a new cultural renaissance, a new economic renaissance, where we have young people, children ages 3 or so and up, learning to play classical music, learning to sing, learning what real science is, making these types of discoveries. We don't have the so-called money for this anymore because we want to pay billions of dollars to bail out Wall Street, but we cut our sciences, we cut our arts, So that's what people should be upset about, and also, and not, they're taking my money away, because they're taking your happiness, your life, your livelihood away. And you have to know what it means to fight to get that back.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to contribute that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's funny because you can look at a violin player and you can say, well, how is this generating wealth? You might say, okay, well, maybe it's generating creativity. Maybe the person is being creative because they're performing in the arts. Well, there's a lot of art which is actually not creative. There's a lot of art, so-called, which is little more than just, explosions in the medium, whatever that may be, whether it's a Jackson Pollock or a Philip Glass or any of that other stuff. But, because what the actual question of the distinguishing between a human being and an animal, a beast, is that the beast is unable to reason beyond the limitations of its perceptions. And different animals have different perceptions than we do. Some can see in ultraviolet or infrared, or they have some kind of synesthetic mix of differing senses, or they can operate by magnetic field lines like migrating birds. But despite that, there's a reason why 99.9% of all species that have ever lived on this earth have gone extinct. When you have global shifts in climate because of changes in our location in the galaxy. So the question is, what distinguishes a human being from everything else that we've ever discovered so far? Is that we possess an ability to understand universally applied laws or principles that govern, obviously universally, of which Leibniz was referring to. The organization of the solar system as a system, not just random bodies floating out there. The organization of life as a system, even though you can't point to a thing in an object, in an organism, and say, here's where its life is. You can't point to a spot in you and say, here's where your soul is, or your mind. These things are immaterial. They act upon the geological time scale, and they have the potential to act universally, everywhere. And that quality, to be able to take something which is just a rock and turn it into a resource, or just an animal and domesticate it, or a baby, and teach it how to do these things. The Leibniz discusses in this paper, he discusses the highest form of happiness is actually the lasting, most durable form of happiness is that which comes from helping another human being actually develop their creative powers. And that it's that where you actually get a sense of things. So when we develop the classical arts, the subject matter in classical art is this subject. The effect of classical art upon the mind is to foster and nurture this ability, this loving, reasoning faculty. And that is why Mozart and Beethoven and Bach and Brahms and Schubert and Schumann, when performed from that intention, to allow the music as it was written to actually evoke these qualities, rather than in some formal way or some expressionist way, which ruins that, actually engenders a quality in the population to be able to handle the historical tensions of their age, to develop a deeper insight into the creative processes, and to reason beyond their immediate perceptions and immediate emotions that may grip them at any one time. And what that allows is for a greater number of creative geniuses to emerge. People who, in whatever field of work they're living and working and applying themselves, will be able to make that next breakthrough that revolutionizes all of society. The introduction of electricity, the introduction of atomic fission or atomic fusion or matter antimatter or some other kind of thing where now as a society we can exert a control over this. Like if it doesn't rain in California because the place is a drought and it's going to have a 1,000-year drought, you can cause systems, you can understand, wow, clouds form because galactic radiation ionizes the atmosphere, which water droplets condense onto, and you can make it rain like they're doing in Oman or they've done in many other states across the country, across the world. And that has economic value. The value is not in the ionization tower. The value is not in the bill of credit that was issued to the company to build the ionization tower. The value is not in the food or the cities that were saved from desiccation because of the rain that was caused to fall because of the ionization tower. Those are all effects. Those are all derivative. They're things that are the result of the actual value in the economy, which is the creative individual's mind who developed these things. And so when we're talking about the value of money and pieces of paper, we have to understand that these deeper invisible things that occur within you, this is the actual real source of value in an economy. And that's why Alexander Hamilton, in his report on manufacture, said to cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise is not among the least considerable of the expedients by which the wealth of a nation may be promoted. Even things in themselves not positively advantageous sometimes become so by their tendency to provoke exertion. Every new scene which is opened to the busy nature of man to arouse and exert itself is the addition of a new energy to the general stock of effort.
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton understood this. Thomas Jefferson did not understand this.
I think in the 50s we had a lot of that yet.
Yeah, and it's true, you're right.
I grew up with that, and this is the thing that we used to imagine Norman Cousins magazine, and he talked about the arts and music and all this, and it was a glorious thing to do. Today, you don't see any of that. All the magazines out there are really, they're trashy to me because there's no beauty and no joy.
Mm-hmm.
That is engendered by the ideas or stories or whatever, because the story can do that to you.
That's right.
That violin, I took violin lessons as an adult. I wanted to do it when he was the same age, but he gave me the violin, but I've also taken the piano, as an adult. So you can always do it, but how do you get started? You win.
Yeah, you make it a part of your society. Go ahead, Joe.
It's interesting to contrast the violin player with that other 7-year-old.
Oh,
Queen.
Joel said contrast the violin player with the other 7-year-old putting the Sig Heil salute up.
Yeah.
Yeah, not what we want.
Oh, okay.
That's what he was talking
Queen
about.
Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth. Nope, this is not a violin player. So, we're gonna. I would like to take some more questions, but I'd like to conclude by saying just on this that if we want to truly bring about this new source of wealth, of happiness, and human creativity, we have one thing to do.
Can you read it so we can?
2015, let's end the bloody empire. Yeah. so that's, and we're on the way to doing that. very much on the way to doing that. So let's get some more discussion going
I
here.
have only one question, because I'm old. This core thing, education, do you know anything about it?
Common Core.
Common Core?
Well, it's definitely not classical education.
Well, I feel bad because I know people like Lynn Beck are against it, but I don't know that much about it, but I mean, they're gonna make
It's-
everybody study it.
Teach to test,
Teach it,
treat human beings like robots, more
It's a
standardized
lot
testing.
Based on standardized testing.
Yep.
But there's some sub-issues too, which is they impose it on teachers, you give them a say in it, but impose it on teachers, and it takes a year to understand it, and to prepare for it, so you can teach it to the kids. That's like a sub-issue. But the
Mhm.
whole issue of teachers not getting them to participate, in creating it, they can create it. And they work
And
with kids every day.
She knows as a teacher.
Yeah, being a smart student doesn't mean you can fill in a bubble on a test. It means you can reason and think for yourself.
Yeah, right.
And if you're gonna force kids into a situation where the ability of the school to get funding and the teacher to get paid and the kid to graduate is based upon the ability of filling in bubbles, you're gonna create a dead mind in society.
and
I
then
had
the
to put my
unions will help.
grandson in private school.
What's that?
I had to put my grandson in private school.
See, it's an interesting thing. If you look at what Isaac Stern did after the fall of Mao in China, is he went in there and taught these kids violin. And you had these kids who were 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years old with perfect technique and zero passion. And you can't teach creativity. You can't teach the love that inspires. You have to provoke it. And you challenge people, and and this is the thing about classical composition, is its use of paradox and metaphor and irony to provoke in the audience the ability to make a discovery, to challenge their perceptions of reality with what is being discussed and presented, so that the person themselves is infected with a germ that causes them to think, test, and discover, and become excited by the power of discovery through their own faculties. That's classical education. And that was, a whole curriculums and so forth, the methods were developed for that by Humboldt and other people in the German classical period. And at times we've done that here in the United States, but certainly not under the current last 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you develop some more about Greece, the current situation?
Yeah, I think the
EU.
the EU, well,
The
the EU. Well, the situation in Greece is, as Mr. LaRouche described it, not a Greek problem. It's a global problem. It's a problem of the collapse of the transatlantic financial system. Greece is the guinea pig for the empires and the Troika, the European Union's policy that is now exploding into not just Greece, but also Italy, Spain, Portugal, other Ireland, other nations as well. When you have a system where you say that human life comes secondary to the banking interests, where you tell, as Greece has been told, as Ian was saying before, that Greece has to cut people's pensions. People are going to the banks right now. They just reopened some of the banks, but at the same time, there is still no liquidity flowing. There's no credit there. You have a situation where I think earlier today, just let me get the reports from.
It's still 60 euros a day or something.
Yeah, 60 euros a day that people are being able to go in and get. Give me 1 second here.
Now, I brought up Greece because it's a good example of how the debt is paying off the debt we were talking about, globally. Has nothing to do with helping the Greek people.
No.
It's flowing through the banks to the Troika,
The other banks, yeah.
The other,
Right.
they control Europe through their system in Europe. But so if they pay off all the debt, they're shutting down their economy,
So they're
but they're
still,
not benefiting.
right, they're still taking money from the depositors. They're calling for a new bail-in of the banking system that's being is insisted on by the EU. This was a part of the so-called deal or arm twisting maneuver that was done to Greece leadership, including Tsipras, the prime minister of Greece, who was forced to take a bailout deal or to take a settlement with these banks that, as we're talking about, they're trying to protect the system that has no intrinsic value. They're trying to protect the system that's bankrupt and saying that elderly people can't get their pensions, people can't get their life savings, their basic cost of living, and so forth. And you have an all-out dire crisis. But one thing that's interesting of this Greek situation is that you got the key people who's pushing the murder on Greece, Obama, Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain,
The Queen of
the
England.
Queen of England, very explicitly the Queen of England, who just went over to Germany and said, you better crack down on Greece, you better make them cry mercy. I mean, these are the people who are sitting here and saying that that Greece should continue to pay its debt when everybody knows that Greece cannot pay its debt. It's an illegitimate debt in the first place. It shouldn't be paid. I mean, that's the same thing they want to do here in the United States. If people start having, as it's already happening, their Social Security, their Medicare, their pensions taken away, and so forth, and say we're going to loot you to the bone until this debt is paid. What is that? That is all out evil, satanic policy. And so, I mean, the Greece situation, people have all the media have all types of screwed up conceptions about, oh, these are just lazy people who didn't want to pay their bills. No, the lazy people are the looting bankers of the Wall Street apparatus and the troika and so forth that ripped people off and is saying that you have to continue to bail us out. So, the interesting thing I was going to respond to on that as well is a lot of people know that Germany and what Merkel is doing is just criminal because they're hypocrites by the fact that Germany had a debt write-off, a debt write-down, that when they had enormous amounts of debt, they wanted people to come to their rescue. And so
After the Second World War.
after the Second World War, exactly. And so this was done, probably, what was it, a half? Or
Mm-hmm.
a half of the German debt was written off, but they don't want the same for Greece. And as I said, it's not just Greece. This is the plan that the empire has for many other nations because they know their system is bankrupt and it's crumbling to the T right now. And the only way you're going to save Greece is you have to have one, global Glass-Steagall. This is what Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche are calling for. And two, you have to have a debt conference, a write down of all this fictitious debt. And then we have to go back to everything that we just laid out right here today.
I think that's the important thing, is that you don't have to make the mistake of accepting the circumstances that are dictated to you by the pop culture, the politicians, the people who are the experts. LaRouche never accepted authority as a basis for truth. And it was one of the key things he made as a decision that put him in a different direction in his life. And what you should do instead of accepting authority as the basis for truth is begin to have a rigorous reinvestigation of the foundation of history as this fight between a definition of mankind as another animal or as something immortal and creative, and develop that quality of creativity in yourself by actual working through of the discoveries that were made by the people who made them, like Kepler and Bach and Einstein and Plato. So these are but the thing is that at the same time that you're doing that, there has to be an actual on the ground political mobilization. You can't have a idea universe, which is wonderful, and have that be disconnected from the day-to-day living and the day-to-day fight that's going on right now, where the enemy of mankind, this empire, this financial empire, is trying to reduce the world's population through environmentalism or war or financial war. So we need to be able to get to a point where a minority of individuals in society are engaged in the kinds of collective, nonviolent actions, political actions, so that we can intervene, not just saying, as we have in the last elections, I'm voting against that problem, and find out 6 months to a year later that what you voted against is now a new problem. Like when we all didn't like George Bush and Dick Cheney, we voted for hope and change, and now we got something worse. And then we didn't like that, so we voted for the Tea Party, and now that we have something worse. And now people just, they're going for Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, and like, oh my God, these guys' policies contradict themselves, and if they got president, they would kill us even faster. So what we need to do is start fighting for what actually works. And that means actually organizing and intervening into the process with solutions. So to do that, obviously takes resources. We need your funds. We need your contributions. We need you to organize. We need to participate with us. I know next week Randy Weber is having a town hall meeting. He needs to hear from you on these things. We intervened on him 2 years ago, where he said he's looking into Glass-Steagall and he's researching it, and he never signed on to the bill.
It's a slow learner.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It was probably, because these guys will lie and squirm and do whatever they need to say to get out of this situation that you put a spotlight on them. That's what it means to be an opportunist. Mm-hmm. So the point of this whole discussion here is so that you will become more galvanized in your understanding of things that are true and are provoked to respond to these things with your own actions. And that's what will make this fight a success.
Mm-hmm. Can you concretely mention the names of the Glass-Steagall bills, Senate, House, and the names of those sponsors?
Oh, I don't know those names.
Well, I can tell you 1709 for the Senate bill, that's 1709, and 381 for the House bill, and the main sponsors on the Senate bill are Elizabeth Warren, John McCain, Maria Cantwell, Angus King, and now Bernie Sanders, mm-hmm. Glass-Steagall. So Bernie Sanders on the Glass-Steagall, and he has made that a big part of the campaign. But also on the House bill, you have over 65 co-sponsors on the House bill, which they do now have a companion bill with the exact same language in the House as that of the Senate. So they have two bills in the House, but the main thing is they all are calling for the same thing, which is the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, which Hillary Clinton is not calling for.
Okay, I mean, the population should still be supporting them and active,
Yes,
calling them. and
absolutely.
Visiting them.
Visit them, call them. Yeah, that's one of the things we brought up with this Weber event. And if you guys are in different districts and you find out that your Congress member is having an event, tell us about it. Go see them. Go
We'll go
and
with you.
yeah, we'll go with you, but also you should be prepared to go and uh, put, yeah, give them a piece of your mind.
But more so, like, we don't want people to just target their congressman. We need to target our friends and neighbors.
Right.
We need to get, because what happened is we changed the discussion around Glass-Steagall. We changed the discussion in the country. And when you have people who are politicians, they tend to follow the winds of change and drift hither and yon. But the fact of the matter is if the population is demanding Glass-Steagall, the population is demanding the restoration of the credit of the United States dollar, according to Hamilton. If we're demanding physical investment in scientifically advanced projects like our space program, water development, nuclear fusion, things that will actually make a real physical long-term difference, working with countries like Russia, China, India, instead of isolating and attacking them. You create a more powerful dynamic than you do by trying to pigeonhole a congressman in the hallway, and then they can just say, oh yes, I'll look into that, and then 5 years later they say, but who were you again? It's called reviving your culture, the culture of the civilization. It's reviving that. And that's what we're doing. So I guess that's a good place to end for today. We'll see you next week, same time.
And we still take Federal Reserve notes.
Yeah. Yeah.